here on are going to involve some kind of writing. There's a lot of writing, a lot of tablets and cylinders and cave writings and things like that, right? So I kind of thought that this would be a good place to kind of throw in how writing fits into the archaeology we know. We even kind of talked about it a little bit last week with the silver tablet, or silver amulet, and the curse tablet. So this is writing and archaeology. Okay, so the first kind of writing we want to talk about, especially if we're talking ancient writing, is kind of the first one we don't really know much about whatsoever, and that's cuneiform. So cuneiform is a logosyllabic. That means for a picture or a caricature that's a syllable, it's not a sound, right? Not like A, B, C, D, right? It's a B. It's more like ab or something of that nature, right? So every syllable you have makes a noise. So they would have a character for that noise. It's a logosyllabic writing system that was used to write several languages in the ancient Near East. Meaning it's not just one language or another, but it kind of goes across them. Script was in active use in the early Bronze Age until the beginning of the Common Era. So really about 4th or 5th century BC, we stopped seeing so much usage of this. However, this was kind of the majority of the writing that we're going to find in this early age is going to be cuneiform. Right, so the scripts are marked by and named for the characteristic wedge impressions, right? So basically, this is what it looks like, so this is what we're going to call it, right? There's one called head. Guess what it looked like in its earliest form? Head. And then as it kind of changes shape a little bit through the lines and whatnot, it takes on a different, almost not meaning, but a different picture. But it looked like a head. Cuneiform is the earliest known writing system, originally developed to write the Sumerian language that was in southern Mesopotamia. Right? So when we look at things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? The Epic of Gilgamesh is amazing. It's a flood narrative. Well, it's a narrative of a prince and his friend going in search of eternal life. And one of the people they meet along the way, can't remember what he's called in the actual epic, but is basically Ham. It would be the last surviving member of the deluge, the Diluvian flood, right? So he's the last person from that flood that's still alive. He's up on this mountain, and they're talking to him. Now, it's a picture of, I would never say that it is, oh yeah, they got everything the same way. Now, the boat is shaped different, the story of the flood is different, who was on the ark is different, it's not called an ark, all kinds of differences, but the one major similarity is that the world flooded. It's one of 7 cultures that have a flood narrative regarding the entire world. If you include the Chinese have it, the Japanese have it, the South Americans have it, the Hebrew people have it. There are tales of it on England beforehand, Mesopotamia, and there are tales in southern Africa. But everybody writes all of these individual tales off as being an area flood and not a worldwide flood. So go with that where you wish. However, I do think it does kind of provide some evidence. But that is a Sumerian writing, right? The Epic of Gilgamesh. We're also going to talk cuneiform writing when we talk Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder is written in cuneiform. There we go. Here's the alphabet. Looks like a cool alphabet, right? So if you look here, the script has changed over this. period of 2,000 years, right? Just like every other script does. Right? People write their A, that funny little circle with a line beside it, and some people write it with the little top hat and then the circle. Right? No different. That's what it's talking about here. However, you'll notice it went from an actual head to being on its side head to being a triangle on its side with a box, and then it starts getting the different scratching. Right, so if you were to look over here, right, you've got all the different, so this is the rooted Sumerian, the rotated Sumerian, early Babylonian, late Babylonian, and Assyrian. And this is the picture that they would have, and this is what the word meant. So there are obviously more words than this, but this is kind of an abbreviated list. It's got words like star, sun, mouth, man, king, son, head, Lord, his, reed, power, mouth, Oxford, destiny. Destiny, that's crazy that they would have a word that long in like one syllable or one picture. Fish kind of makes sense. Gardener, habitation, Nineveh. Nineveh's got its own symbol. And then ninth. There are tons more. Right? This is just a kind of a abbreviation of it. So this is one of the ways in which we find cuneiform, right? It's written on something flat on the side of the mountain, right to left. Some cuneiform is written on a cylinder. Some people believe that there are some cylinders are meant to be read in like a counterclockwise motion around it, so it's like top to bottom, up and down. Some it's written right to left, and then you just rotate the cylinder to get there. And this is what one of the cylinders looks like. We'll kind of talk about this more in a little bit. This is the cylinder of Antiochus. And the first three lines talk about Antiochus, the great king, great king of multitudes, king of Babylon, king of countries. Just talking about who he is, but then it talks about what he's done that makes him such a great king. So that's cuneiform. Right, then we have Paleo-Hebrew. We kind of talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the curse scroll. Right, there is Paleo-Hebrew on the curse scroll. It's not the only place we see Paleo-Hebrew. It's kind of found all over. It's this, I think what I called it last time was called Proto-Hebrew or Proto-Semitic. Right? So this Paleo-Hebrew or Proto-Hebrew, also known as Old Hebrew, is a writing system found in Canaanite and Aramaic inscriptions. This is including pre-biblical and biblical Hebrew from southern Canaan, also known as the biblical kingdoms of Israel, Samaria, and Judah. Earliest known inscription in the Paleo-Hebrew script is the Zayit stone, which was discovered on a wall at the Tel Zayit in Beth Gurvan Valley in the lowlands of ancient Judea, about 30 miles southwest of Jerusalem. And it's the oldest one we know about. The 22 letters were carved on one side of the 38-pound stone, which resembles a bowl on the other. And it was, they believe it comes from about the mid-10th century BC. So it's pretty old. 3,000 years, give or take. Right? That's pretty old. Maybe 3,100. But it's about 3,000 years old. So this is Hebrew before Hebrew. Right? So it's not strictly a Hebrew. Because I took Hebrew, I have no clue what any of them letters is.
It's not Yiddish?
So,
Is it a form of Yiddish?
no, Yiddish is an offshoot of Hebrew.
Oh.
So this is the Hebrew before there was Hebrew. Right, so during the 6th century BC, the time of the Babylonian exile, the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet was gradually replaced by the use of the imperial Aramaic alphabet. right? And the letters of Imperial Aramaic were again given shapes characteristic of writing Hebrew during the 2nd century, or the Second Temple period, right? So it goes kind of this old Hebrew to this old Aramaic, and that kind of gives way to this New Hebrew. So New Hebrew is kind of what we would call it Second Temple Hebrew, right? The Second Temple Hebrew is what we would read in most biblical texts, especially if we're talking Dead Sea Scrolls stuff. We'll get there in a minute, though. It developed, Hebrew during the Second Temple period developed into this square shape of the Hebrew alphabet that we know today. So this is the Khirbet Kietha Ostracon, which is 10th to 11th century BC. This is kind of a artist rendition of it. It's obviously a 3D, but it is, these are the letters that they find, and they're the same 22 characters we find in the ancient Hebrew or the Paleo-Hebrew dialect. Then we have the Ketef Hinnom scroll, which is 6th century BC. This is the first time we really see one in a scroll formula, and it's right to left, top to bottom. That's the way they're reading this. But this Paleo-Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew would soon give way to what we call Classical Hebrew. All right, so Classical Hebrew is an archaic form of the Hebrew language. So this is Hebrew before the Hebrew that if we were to pick up a Torah today, right, we would read modern Hebrew. Right? So this is pre-modern Hebrew, also known as Classical Hebrew. And the language changes just the same as our language does. Yeah?
Is the Talmud and the Torah the same thing, or are they two different things? I heard the Talmud.
The Talmud is the teachings of the rabbis. Okay. So it's rabbinic teachings that they go anywhere from first couple of centuries BC to the first couple of centuries AD. And various scholars give them different grades on their level of understanding, even within the Hebrew text. It's kind of a commentary, if you will.
A commentary of the Talmud?
No, the Talmud is a commentary of the Hebrew Old Testament, of the Torah.
Of the Torah. Okay.
Yes. Torah, Hebrew, Old Testament.
Okay.
So, Classical Hebrew, it's an archaic form of the Hebrew language, a language in the Canaanitic branch of the Semitic languages, spoken by Israelites in the land in the area known as the Land of Israel, roughly west of the Jordan River and east of the Mediterranean Sea. Right, so from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, that is Israel proper as understood historically. So that is where this Classical Hebrew was found. So Biblical Hebrew or Classical Hebrew possessed a series of emphatic consonants whose precise articulation is disputed, right? We don't know exactly what words sounded like. We have a guess, but nobody has spoken Classical Hebrew in a very, very long time. Even Hebrew scholars don't agree on how things were pronounced. We don't know, and personal opinion, I think that's why the Tetragrammaton exists, is because the Hebrew people did not want to mess up when it came to God's name. I would rather, call him nothing than to disrespect his name like that. So that the Tetragrammaton, we know what it looks like. How they would say that, I don't know, Yahweh? But I don't know, right? So, also notice that this just says that there are consonants. How many vowels are there in the Hebrew language? 0. That would be a big donut hole. No vowels. It is all consonants. Later on, people would go in and they would add consonants into words to make them pronounceable. Thus the reason that we don't know exactly how it was pronounced, because they did not utilize vowels. So Yahweh becomes Yahweh, not because we think that that's exactly how it was pronounced, but because they took the later on Lord, or Adonai, and they took the vowel points from that and they put it into Yahweh to make Jehovah. Yahovah. Adonai. So that's where that comes from. That's where Jehovah comes from. It is a Greekized Hebrew word put into context so that people could be able to pronounce it. So when groups come in and they say, we're the only group pronouncing the name of God correctly, what's his name? Jehovah. Probably not. You took a word and you added all the vowels from that word and put it in a Hebrew word. Right? Might as well just say it's Matthew, because we don't know. Right? We don't know what the vowel points were. We don't know any of that. So to say otherwise is to speak out of turn, in my opinion. Earlier, biblical Hebrew had 3 consonants that were not distinguished in writing and later merged with other consonants, right? So there were more, but then they just brought them into classical Hebrew. No, wrong direction, sorry. All right, so biblical Hebrew, 22 letters, all of which are consonants. It's written from right to left, not left to right. The alphabet is often referred to as the alphabet, right? The 2 first letters. Right? Alphabet comes from obviously the Greek alphabet, alpha beta. Right? The Hebrew is aleph, bet, gamal, dalet, he, vav, zayin, het, tet, yod, kaf, lamed, mem, nun, samek, ayin, he, tzadeh, kof, resh, shin, tav. Yes. That was the alphabet.
Say it again?
The Hebrew alphabet.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's the Hebrew alphabet. It's all 22 characters. So that's just how they pronounce the letters. That doesn't really do anything when it comes to reading it. Once again, reading it, you're looking at vowel points. Right? Vowel points are something that was added into modern Hebrew. It is not, and then they just carried it backwards to say, oh, well, this is where we think the vowel point would be in this Hebrew. Right? So it's not something that we know. Right? So vowels are not explicitly written. Instead, pronunciation aids called nikud, which are dots and dashes, are sometimes added. Right? More often, that's found in modern Hebrew than in classical Hebrew. We really don't see it in most Hebrew texts. This is an image of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is one of the 2 ways in which we really find any Hebrew writing. One is on scrolls, generally made of animal skin and cut and sewn together to make one solid scroll. It would cost a lot of money to get a scroll. Now you know why the scribes were so, I don't know, they strove for perfection. Because you mess up, that's a whole lot of money down the drain. Can you imagine being on like the last chapter of Isaiah? You're like in Isaiah 66 and you're like, oh, I wrote a code here and it should have been a shin, or I wrote a shin and it should have been a sin, or whatever, right? That would, I don't know, it'd drive me nuts. Because you got to start over. Because you can't mess up the Word of God. Right? You do see the same thing with them that you see with some Greek texts, as you will have like scribal notes or scribal corrections. However, They took their job very seriously and they strove to be perfect with it. It does not mean that they were. It means that's what their drive seemed to be, because there are errors, but they are few. Right? The other place you're going to see it are things like this, right? Full-on inscriptions in rock, in marble, in gold, right? Actually inscribing it into things. We start to see that within this context, especially if we're talking biblical archaeology. You're starting to see these characters show up on things like pottery, like tablets, like gold, silver, lead. And we're talking about the curse tablet. That was written on lead. So you're starting to begin to see the alphabet take a more prominent place instead of so many pictographs or pictograms to symbolize what's going on in the world, but more of seeing the alphabet, as it were, taking shape around the culture, and the culture starting to embrace it. Now, one thing that happened is, as the Greeks took over the entire world, right? You look at the Greek Empire, they took over everything. Right? Most people don't realize how expansive this was. The Queen of the Nile, right? We all know who that is. She was Greek. Yes. Cleopatra was Greek. She was not African. She was Greek.
She wasn't Egyptian?
No. She was Greek. Her lineage came from a bunch of Greek rulers. So even Cleopatra, yes, was Greek. Right? The Greeks ruled basically the entire known world at this point. And as the alphabet, we're at this point where the alphabet is becoming so central to everything in the world, right? You're getting a lot of writing, a lot of exchanging with things like receipts, right? Yes, not everybody can read. About 1 in 10 around the Common Era, the turn to the Common Era could read, so 10% of the common person could read. But the writing was becoming so important, and it became so absolute everywhere that you had to be able to read and write in Greek, that even the Hebrew scriptures at this point are being translated into Greek. Thus, the Greek Septuagint. Right? So Koine Greek, it evolved from this spread of Greek following conquest of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, and served as the lingua franca, meaning the one language, right? This overarching language for everybody throughout the Mediterranean and Middle East during the following centuries. It was based mainly on Attic and related Ionic speech forms, with various mixtures brought through dialect leveling with other varieties, right? So it's basically doing that word stealing that we were talking about from when we talked about the Exodus, right? There's a lot of word borrowing. So the Greek language is coming up, and then they start borrowing words. Oh, you know what? We're going to borrow this word. We do it in English all the time, right? Croissant, we all know what that is. That's a French word, right? Pizza, we all know what that is. It's an Italian word. So what? Yeah. We've got so many of them that we've just borrowed, right? We borrow a lot of words in the English language. It's got some Latin mix, some Greek mix, and some, a variety of other things, right? So we do a lot of that as well. Now, it lasts until you get into this medieval Greek. Medieval Greek starts about the same time Latin starts to take over the world, right? Everything is Greek. The New Testament is written in Greek. The sign above Jesus was written in Greek. It was also written in Latin and Hebrew. So we know those three languages are very important. So Homer, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Pythagoras, all of this is in Greek. So that stays kind of the course until we get into this period of medieval Greek. So that's somewhere around 330 that medieval Greek starts to take over from Koine Greek, and Latin starts to become the main language of the Roman Empire. So it's not until almost the 4th century that the language of the Roman Empire matches the language of the Romans. It's quite a long time for that to take place. When we talk about the Latin fathers, when we're talking church history, we're not talking like 1st and 2nd century writers. We're generally talking mid to late 3rd century into the 4th century, and even more so into the 5th when we get into Augustine and Jerome and people like that. So the post-classical period of Greek thus refers to the creation evolution of the Koine Greek throughout the entire Hellenistic and Roman eras of history until the start of the Middle Ages. Right? Depends on when people want to date the start of the Middle Ages. Some date it earlier, some date it later. I don't care. I'm kind of that I don't care. We understand that it doesn't all just happen at once. Right? I can't point at an event and go, nope, the Middle Ages started right here. This is the Middle Age start point. Everybody holds to this. Nobody holds to an absolute on that. Some put it earlier, some later, some in the 9th century, some in the 5th century, some in the 11th century. So, it existed until really the Roman Empire had reached the largest it would be, at which point Latin was kind of now the big language, and Koine Greek gets not used so much just in the Aegean area as it getting used, and thus the new Greek is born. So the Greek alphabet, it has vowels. We have vowels finally. All right, so it's 24 letters. We do have some kind of corresponding letters in the English alphabet to the Greek alphabet, right? So you got alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, right? A, B, C, D, E. Iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu would be J, or would be I, K, L, M, N. There's no J, right? Then Omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon would be like O, P, R, S, T, U. So while it's not a perfect one-to-one, phonetically that's kind of where we would be. So the Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, zeta, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, omega. So when Jesus says in the Revelation, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, he's saying I'm the first, I'm the last, the beginning and the end. So that's just, he's pointing at the alphabet. We've seen the alphabet. So some of the things that we're going to see Greek, they're largely written on papyrus at this point, right? So most of what you would see of the Greek New Testament is going to be papyrus, right? We'll talk more about what a papyrus is, but this is Ryland Papyrus P52, 2nd century, Book of John. This is where Jesus says, or where Jesus answers Pilate's question of what is truth. That's what you get here. Then you have the Bodmer Papyrus 7, or P72. This is the book of Jude. 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and Jude. This is actually Jude 1 on the right side of your screen. Now, Greek is read like English, left to right. All these other systems were right to left. Greek gave us a second thing of we're now reading left to right. Or up and down, yes. Cuneiform could, some people say cuneiform could be read up and down. I don't know. I don't know enough about cuneiform. So what mediums did they use? Mediums are important, right? Because that tells us what we should expect to last. So the first medium is this. Why do we have so much of the Sumerian writing? They're written on clay, for crying out loud. That's not going nowhere. You could bury that thing, come back 3,000 years later, and it's right where you left it. Right? So that's kind of the first writing medium to talk about, is that they're using this cuneiform. The cuneiform is generally written on a clay tablet or cylinder. I've seen the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder, like the actual one. That's pretty cool to see. And just to think that, okay, this cylinder is Nebuchadnezzar. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were around when this thing was. Right? Or in the words of VeggieTales, Shadrach, Meshach, and I'm a bumblebee. But that's how long these last. Is the book of Daniel was around when these were written. Daniel is a prophet and a leader and an exile, as was Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. And so when we talk about the prophets, we're going to talk a lot about cuneiform and what does the Bible get right about what's going on around the world according to these tablets or these cylinders or these stories. Because even in your stories, which you're not seeing a lot of quite yet at this point, you have some of the historical backing. And then when you've got multiple historical accounts about the same event, just a little different, you got to start questioning, okay, is this maybe a real event and not just some, hallucination that people are having? The next one, right? Paul writes, bring me the parchments in the papyrus. And so what is a parchment? Basically, it is a tanned animal skin, thinly sliced, so that one would be able to write on it. Now, let's think historically speaking. How long do you expect that a dried out piece of animal flesh would last? Not very. A couple hundred years. So when they say, why don't we have autographs of the Bible? I don't know. Is it made out of papyrus or it's made out of parchment? Take your pick. Both of them they disintegrate pretty easily. And my personal favorite is papyrus. Now, I have brought you all a gift. This is a piece of Egyptian papyrus. It is a plant leaf that is thinly sliced and woven together. Now this weaving together of the plant leaf creates its fiber, but also kind of a natural line on it, like you would have for lined paper. This is what one would feel like. Does this feel like it's going to hold up sturdy for the next 200 years, 300 years? How about 1,100 years? Probably not, right? But it's kind of neat to be able to look at it and go, okay, I can pick this side of the weave, and I've just got natural lines that I can write on. And if you look at a lot of the biblical papyri that we have, they're using this like natural weave pattern as lines. And they're making sure that it's cut so that it's fairly straight, and they use it almost as a line. And then they use one of the markers on either the left and the right as their stopping and starting point. So that's how you don't have the writings being off kilter like this to read it straight. They're straight up and down. But if you look at the veins in the plants, they're going straight north and south on the sheet of paper and straight east and west across it, so that they'll be able to write correctly and properly and keep it under control, because it's not easy to control. And think of a ballpoint pen on this. It's going to jump around all over the place, right? Just give it a try. You almost have to use like a marker to make this work right. I've actually brought the type that if people are going to do facsimiles, they generally use a fountain pen for it because it writes so smoothly, right, like that. So you get this smooth like circle or lines and things like that. However, when you use a ballpoint, there's a lot more jaggedness to it, just on your circle or your loop or your rounded part. So you can see that they're going through a lot of ink because they're using that nice quill pen, and I can't imagine how difficult it would be to write all of this on a piece of paper. You ever tried just copying a book of the Bible down by hand? It's painful. I tried doing it with the book of Jude a few times. No, I have copied it a few times, but yeah, so that is the alphabets we're looking at. That is kind of the history behind them, when we're going to see them, what's going to be on those things, and really, what are they made of? Right? So as we're talking about the prophets, we're talking about King David, and we say there's a Paleo-Hebrew writing, right? And a lot of this is born out of the questions that came out when we were talking about these things. When we talk about that, okay, so when are we talking? When did it die out? When would I expect to see this? So when they say we've got the earliest version of Yahweh's name, right, of the name of God on this curse tablet, right, why is that? Why isn't it before then? Why isn't it, because that's really as early as we're finding writings, is what we would say. Especially when we're talking Hebrew or Proto-Hebrew. Now when we get into the Proto-Semitic that we already talked about a little bit, which is the before Hebrew, before the before Hebrew would be this Proto-Semitic, which we talked about finding on the Sinai Peninsula. So I just kind of felt like we needed to kind of put a baseline here so we can understand as we're going forward, okay, what exactly are we talking about with these writings? So, all right, are there any questions? None? All right. I must have done a good job. Pat myself on the back. Where's the X?